We've all heard about pirates and how they terrorize the open seas, instilling a perpetual fear in every sailor's subconscious. Yet, World War II would see a similar resurgence of these pirates, this time armed with far deadlier weapons and cunning tactics. Even though their tactics were morally questionable and violated the laws of warfare, this hardly concerned them. Thus, when you, as a crew member on a merchant ship, would learn the true identity of what seemed to be just another harmless trader, it would already be too late. Today, we'll discuss how the Germans in World War II terrorized Allied ships with some of their sneaky tactics, making the life of a sailor extremely dangerous, terrifying, and deadly. The German commerce raiders effectively paralyzed the Allied trade routes that transported essential wartime materials. Their strategy revolved around concealing their true identities until they were close enough to effectively ambush unsuspecting Allied liners, steamers, colliers, and tankers. One of the most intriguing German merchant raiders was the Cormoran. Equipped with 9-cylinder diesel engines that powered electric motors, it could reach speeds of 18 knots, allowing it to easily overtake and intercept almost any merchant vessel. However, its greatest strength lay not in its weaponry or speed, but in its effective use of camouflage, which allowed it to safely and swiftly approach a target ship without risking itself. It featured a special corridor along its entire length that shielded the crew from the prying eyes of any ship that might be investigating the Germans' intentions unknowingly, and thus allowed the German crew to prepare and wait at their positions ready for action. Behind the false hull plates was the ship's main armament, 4 heavy 5.9-inch guns, fully manned and ready. When the fake plates were quickly removed, revealing the guns, they were already prepared for action, giving the Allies no chance to realize what was happening, much less react. In addition to the main guns, they had modified anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns, cleverly camouflaged to follow the ship's contour, or even hydraulically raised, literally popping out from inside the ship ready for action. Moreover, Cormoran was equipped with torpedo tubes, a dual launcher on the upper deck, and 1 underwater tube on each side of the ship. If that wasn't enough, it could also carry a payload of mines intended to be laid around Allied ports in Australia or India. It also featured an improvised hospital, space for livestock, and some even carried reconnaissance airplanes. First, the initial and perhaps most challenging task for any German commerce raider was to somehow break through the British Royal Navy blockade and reach the Atlantic Ocean. They had 2 options. The first was a short but extremely dangerous route directly through the English Channel, with minimal support of Luftwaffe and captured French coastal batteries. The alternative was a slightly less dangerous, longer route via the North and Faroe Islands. Disguised as a Soviet freighter, the Cormoran this way successfully emerged into the Atlantic in 1940. Although each raider had its operational zone, the nature of their missions afforded them considerable freedom to make on-the-spot decisions. Unlike U-boats, merchant raiders stayed far from the main convoy routes, preferring to attack ships sailing alone without armed escort. Most of the targets were chosen by the raider's captain himself, who would decide whether the risk was worth it and if the attack was viable based on several factors. The first depended on the flag the target ship flew. Was the ship behaving oddly or suspiciously, sailing quickly and in illogical patterns, or with its lights off? All these could indicate that the ship was carrying something valuable and important, or knowing it had no escort, was trying to evade attack. Depending on what it carried, the targeted ship might choose to fight back, protecting important, expensive, or secret cargo, or immediately surrender without a fight if it carried something less important, like raw materials, coal, or wood. Raider ships would always consider all factors before an attack. As being far from their ports, they faced a long and uncertain return journey for repairs if damaged. Being on long missions, they also had to consider their limited ammunition and torpedoes. Therefore, they always selected a ship that would be an easier but valuable target, something that would significantly damage the Allies. The best possible scenario for a raider ship was for the target to surrender without a fight. But this was not always the case. When the captain decided to initiate the hunt, the well-trained crew would spring into action. First, disguised under a false flag and sending false signals about its identity, the raider would cunningly approach its target. Then, at an appropriate proximity, the raider would use its superior speed to quickly close the distance to the target to practically point-blank range. Then, it would swiftly remove its camouflage, revealing its powerful weaponry aimed at the targeted merchant ship, sternly demanding over the radio and through light signals that the ship stop or face the consequences. If they refused to comply with the raider's direct order, a warning shot would follow. If that wasn't enough to compel cooperation, or if the merchant ship tried to resist or even attempted to send a distress call or man its own guns, then combat would immediately ensue. The raiders would open rapid and merciless fire on the ship until it was disabled, destroyed, or the crew surrendered. Once the firing stopped, the raiders, like old pirates, boarded the attacked ship to see what it carried, who they were, where they were going, etc. If the attacked ship carried interesting and valuable cargo, and if it had enough fuel, it would be captured as a trophy and brought into ports under German control. Otherwise, the ship would be sunk with demolition charges and the crew taken aboard the raider ship and kept in special rooms as prisoners until they could be transferred to supply ships. In this way, Cormoran had successfully sunk 8 merchant ships near the African coast. After April 1941, it changed its guise to that of a Japanese freighter and shifted its operations to the Indian Ocean. By frequently altering their identity, codes, and area of operations, the raiders greatly complicated the Allies' efforts to track and accurately identify them. These raiders disguised themselves as ordinary merchant ships, mimicking their movements, routines, and even entering and exiting various ports using various false signals to cover their tracks. Cormoran continued its voyage towards the Maldives, laying mines at strategic locations along the way. It attacked 3 more ships, a Greek vessel that mistook it for a British cruiser performing a routine check, a Yugoslavian merchantman that refused to stop until it was shelled, and an Australian merchantman hit and immobilized after it tried to send a distress signal. All of this was done in the true style of pirates, cleverly deceiving and confusing their targets until it was too late for any resistance. However, their fortunes in battle would soon change. On November 19, 1941, near the coast of Western Australia, Cormoran spotted another target. It was an unescorted ship, an ideal prey, and as always, they approached it with cunning. However, this victim turned out to be the armoured cruiser HMS Sydney, and as soon as Cormoran's crew realised this, they panic-stricken turned to flee, but it was too late. Now, with no chance of winning in a fight or escaping from the armoured cruiser, their only option was to try to maintain the guise of an innocent merchant ship, hoping to deceive Sydney. Cormoran began to send false signals, and even a distress call to confuse Sydney's crew, who were now dangerously close, constantly demanding them to disclose their identity, cargo, and destination. When Sydney came alongside Cormoran, now very close, it demanded identification and the secret call sign one more time, which they were supposed to know. However, since no one knew the secret call sign, Cormoran realized it was futile to continue hiding and immediately raised its battle flag and exposed its weapons. Sydney was taken by surprise, receiving a fearsome salvo of cannon and torpedo fire, with its forward gun tower and bridge completely destroyed as Cormoran fired everything it had. This sudden turn nearly knocked out the Sydney cruiser completely, but Sydney managed to fire off a salvo before its guns were destroyed. This return fire struck Cormoran, which, despite significant damage, continued relentless firing at Sydney as it tried to distance itself, now mortally wounded. As an uncontrolled fire broke out on Cormoran, it was forced to stop, now immobilized in the water with the fire dangerously spreading toward the ammunition storage. The raiders hastily abandoned the ship, while Sydney had already sunk. A major warship had just been sunk by a much smaller vessel, which would have stood no chance against it in a fair fight. due to the clever tactic of disguise and surprise attack when least expected. However, without the protection of disguise, it would have been the end for the raiders. Employing this tactic, throughout the first half of World War II, the raiders terrorized Allied ships, capturing and sinking a significant number. This forced the Allies to significantly strengthen the defences of their convoys and escorts, and to increase sea reconnaissance, keeping an eye on every vessel. Yet, until then, the pirates remained a formidable threat.